So Queen Victoria is on the throne and the elites are thriving. The fashion is giving Bridgerton. But that wasn't, that's not everyone. Around 80% of society was part of the working class and the underclass. For the working class, their whole life revolved around work in order to survive. And the underclass were usually impoverished and depended on the charity of others to get by. Now, if you were lucky enough to get a job, working conditions at this time were absolutely terrible. The Industrial Revolution was going strong, so there's like a ton of new machinery being used to mass produce things in factories. And that even means matches. And the factory we're talking about today was a match factory owned by two men, William Bryant and Francis May. Bryant and May were smart and knew they wanted to manufacture a product that people needed to buy, so they would always be profitable. In the 1850s, they started importing matches from Sweden. Originally, they were importing something called safety matches. Now, these matches were supposed to be safe because they didn't spark everywhere when you struck them like on the side of the box. So like Joan here, she has some matches. I suck at matches. Every time I try to light them, it never works out for me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Are you trying to burn the place down? Anywho. So Bryant and May is raking in thousands of dollars selling the safety matches. So with this success, they decided to cut out the middlemen and make the matches themselves. Well, not themselves, but hire people to make the matches, So in 1861, Bryant and May, they took their profits and they purchased a patent on a special kind of match called the, quote, strike anywhere match. Which is exactly like what it sounds like. You can strike this match anywhere and it would light. Other matches, they didn't do this very well. So the guys, they knew that they had a bestseller on their hands. The common slang for these matches was called the, quote, Lucifer match, because in Latin, Lucifer means brightly shining one. Great. So once they secured their patent, they opened up a factory in London. Now, Bryant and May, they weren't the only businessmen to have a match factory in London. There were others around, but no one came even close to their success. Now, this is because their strike anywhere matches were coated in a chemical called white phosphorus. Now, people were aware this chemical was not good for them. In the past, there were warnings on products that used phosphorus, telling people do not inhale when using this, pretty much. Toxic. But I guess in the past, when you would use a match, there would be some kind of rotten egg smell. And the white phosphorus, it got rid of that smell. So people were willing to ignore the warning of the phosphorus because they didn't like that smell, It's literally like everything today. Everything is toxic for you, okay? Listen, everything, allegedly, is toxic for you. And it's we know it's bad for us, but we keep using it. Plastic water bottles, bad for us. Microplastics and everything, we don't care. It's like that, but with matches. So even though sales of these matches were doing very, very well, there, of course, were some shady things happening in the Bryant and May factory. By 1864, Francis May left the company after some disagreements on how the company was being run. He was eventually replaced by William Bryant's son. His son's name? Listen, Wilberforce. That's his name, Wilberforce. Yeah, let's take a beat there. Huh? Yeah, Wilberforce Bryant. Wilberforce. Yeah, I thought about it a lot. I don't know, superhero? What is that? What is that name? Where does it even come from? Wilberforce? I don't know. Anywho, so he brings in a son. So Wilberforce, he became the manager of the factory and he was all about increasing profit, And he was I don't really care about the workers. We just need more money. So at one point, he had about 5,000 people working for him. Now, these people, they were working 12 to 14-hour days, a minimum of 6 days a week. Most of the workers were women, teenage girls, and children. Some of these children were 6 years old. Matchmaking required workers to be on their feet all day, and the little money they did make, they would have to use to purchase their own tools and supplies in order to work in the factory. So this meant you had to buy your own string, your own glue, your own fuel. Yeah, the workers were allowed 2 breaks per day, and on these breaks, they were only allowed to eat or use the bathroom. That's it. If any rules were broken, they would be given a fine. And this company loved giving out fines. If you were a few minutes late, if you were talking to one of your coworkers, if you were going to the bathroom outside of an official break, if you had a messy workspace, you'd be slapped with a fine. So the workers were making such little money, a lot of them couldn't even afford shoes. So the only option they had was to work barefoot. So it's like, of course, their feet would get dirty, but then you would get a fine for that. You couldn't win. On top of all of that, these women and children were physically abused by the supervisors in the factory. They did this to stop them from going to management and complaining about their work conditions. They would just threaten them, attack them, so they wouldn't talk. Bryant and May knew they could get away with this because these workers didn't have enough social power to put up much of a fight. They're like, what are you gonna do? Exactly, nothing. Like many factories at this time, Bryant and May hired their workers from lower-class households. They were considered to be uneducated and looked down upon in the upper class. Now, to be fair, they didn't really have other options. This is also why they put up with all the abuse, because you either work and you get abused for pennies, or you be homeless on the street and starve to death. So it's which one do you want? So many of the Bryant and May workers were Irish immigrants. And at the time, the Irish were being starved out of their own country. So many were forced to immigrate to England in order to survive. So when they came to England, they were taking whatever job was available. Didn't matter how hard it was or how little they were being paid. It was better than nothing. There was tons of beef between Irish and English people. Many English people, a lot of them refused to even hire them. There were tons of negative stereotypes about Irish people. For example, it was said that the Irish like to drink and get into fights. This was a stereotype for the Irish men and women. So there was a description of the women who worked for Bryant and May at the time that said, quote, "They fight with their fists to settle their differences, not in the factory, for that is forbidden, but in the streets when they leave work in the evening. They fight like men and are not interfered with by police." So companies, they didn't want to hire them because they didn't want this stereotypical drunk Irish person fighting in their factories. So if they got a job, they found a job, they usually kept the job, because it was hard to go anywhere else. What I'm getting at is they didn't have a lot of options. Most families were so poor, every single person in the household had to pitch in and get a job so they could get food on the table, make rent, stay alive, And as soon as kids could walk, they were essentially put to work. The kids would get sometimes odd jobs in town, working on farms or at rich people's estates. But once the Industrial Revolution rolled around, a lot of kids even worked in factories. So conditions were dangerous and kids were coming home with some serious injuries, or they wouldn't even come home at all. So the government sent a group to investigate how these factories were treating children. Now, Bryant and May were known for employing kids. So of course, these investigators, they went to take a look at their match factory. Rumor was going around that there were several issues at the Bryant and May factory, especially when it came to their child workers. I guess kids were losing their fingers. They'd fall asleep near the machinery and get badly injured. It was bad. So when the investigators go out to the factory, I'm sure a lot of the workers were kind of relieved, hoping that, someone is gonna come in and stop these guys in charge from beating, fining, taking advantage of us and whatnot, Maybe these people are gonna save us and have our backs. But that's not how it went. When the investigation was complete, they had found that everything at Bryant and May's factory was totally and completely fine. Everything was actually great. It was like super. They're like, wow, this is a great factory. We love this. They said it was, quote, a very nicely conducted place. I mean, it seemed like the factory investigators were paid off. I mean, Bryant and May, they had more than enough money to do so. But those are just allegations. Cannot confirm. But they wouldn't get away with it for long because Bryant and May's perfect reputation was about to start crumbling to the ground, just like everyone's jaws. Thank you. So in order to keep production moving, Wilberforce, that name, you know, the guy in charge with the name, great. He stopped caring about any and all safety protocols in the factory. So he felt like he was honestly like above the law. And the investigation, to him, it really proved that. He's like, see, I'm amazing. I could do whatever I want. So he didn't really think that there was anything wrong with, you know, maybe like fudging the safety protocols a bit to save money, cut corners. I don't know. But then his workers started getting sick one by one. Listen, remember the white phosphorus? Well, it turned out to be more than just a little toxic.